Okay, and with that, we are live for episode 145 of Trek Live. How you doing this morning, Dan?
I'm doing great. We got a Voyager topic on the docket, and I'm excited to jump into it. Should be a fun time.
Yeah, agreed. It's been a while since we've done like a straight up Voyager conversation. Trying to remember when we did it last. Maybe the CAS character spotlight.
Yeah, I think that might be it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's been a
this
while.
felt like a while. Yeah.
Yeah, so and this is a unique, kind of more forward-thinking topic with something having to do with Voyager on the horizon being made now. So um, definitely looking forward to um, having that conversation. And um, yeah, it's also kind of like a system. We're so kind of stumbling around, a little tired. But we did this before when the Deep Space Nine documentary was in production. We're going to talk about the Voyager
Yep.
documentary that's being made by the same folks who made What We Left Behind, the Deep Space Nine sort
Yep.
of retrospective look back at the series. And way early on, kind of while it was being planned, being made, we did a show in the early days of Trek Live years ago, talking about what we hope to see, what kinds of things we would like to hear about from the folks participating in that, and we're going to do the same thing here with the Voyager one. Just kind of lay the groundwork for hopes, wishes, things we'd like to see, and then of course when it probably in a couple of years gets finished and is ready to be seen, uh, we'll be here to talk about it, and we'll have this as kind of a years ago initial thoughts to kind of look back on and maybe think about what we got that we wanted and maybe we didn't. Um, so yeah, we're gonna talk about that in a bit. But first, as we are wont to do, we typically start these by talking about our rewatch recaps. What Star Trek have you watched in the last week since we've been here last?
I've watched 2 episodes: the alternate and Armageddon game. So I'm still working through Deep Space Nine, kind of the middle of the road of the season.
Yeah,
Um, alternate wasn't a big fan of, but I did enjoy the um, Armageddon game, which is a kind of a big sci-fi concept, but it is a similar setup that we've probably seen before. Um, but I like the Bashir and O'Brien stuff in it. So yeah,
yeah. Armageddon game is definitely noteworthy as one of the big steps toward getting those two
yeah,
on
it's
the
a
same.
turning point a little bit.
Yeah,
Before these two characters were um, uncomfortable. I'll use that around each other.
mm-hmm.
And now it feels like a little bit a baby steps in the right direction to what we've kind of know as this bromance.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
We're edging toward what they ultimately become with
yeah,
that friendship. Um, I
hmm
think it's a better episode than the Storyteller, which was in first season. We talked about that last week with our first season of Deep Space Nine fantasy draft. We had a
yeah,
little conversation about the Storyteller, but this is accomplishing a lot of what the Storyteller set out to do as well, with kind of growing their dynamic and building a rapport
hmm
for them. But I think it's a little bit of a better
yeah,
story, a more interesting episode, um,
yeah,
and moves that further a little closer to where it ultimately ends up. The
hmm
alternate you mentioned is sort of the Odo with his sort of dad, the Bajoran
yeah,
scientist who worked with him as a newly found entity from the wormhole. Um, yeah, I've always kind of found it a mixed bag. I like the actor who plays the father, James Saloyan, who also
yeah.
played.
I think he's a Star Trek regular. Yeah,
Yeah,
he's been in Star Trek before.
Yep, he was Jetrel in
yeah,
Voyager. He
yeah,
was Admiral Jarrock in The Defector, which is a great episode of The Next Generation.
yeah.
I also really like Jetrel. So he's been around and has given really good guest performances before. And I think he's strong, and I think Rene Auberjonois is typically good as Odo. But I think it's a kind of standard issue mystery. Nothing too surprising, nothing too outside the box. Um,
Yeah.
but Yeah, I mean, you're getting there. You're about halfway through season 2
Hmm.
at this point, so
Yeah.
we'll be tying up season 2 in short order, I'm sure. Um, for me, aka Mammals in the room. How you doing? Good to see you again, as always. Talked about the alternate kind of being in the spirit of Halloween, kind of a horror story, which is true. Um,
Oh, that's true. Yeah,
yeah,
makes a good point.
it's a good October episode. Uh, for me, I'm in the beginning of season 4 of TNG. The last episode I watched is Remember Me. I watched the first 5, I think it is, of season 4 over the weekend.
Nice.
Best of Both Worlds Part 2, Family, Brothers, Suddenly Human, Remember Me. So yeah, 5. Really good run.
Very good run.
Yeah, the serialization
Yeah.
with Best of Both Worlds Parts 1 and 2, and then Family, kind of forming a pseudo three-part story.
Mhm.
Really good. I love Family. I love it not only for the Picard stuff on the Vineyard with his brother, and nephew and sister-in-law. I love the Worf stuff on the Enterprise, dealing with his adoptive parents, who
Oh yeah,
want,
visiting the ship.
yeah, visiting the ship, and they're
Yeah.
kind of going around, getting the tour, talking to Geordi and in engineering, and are doing what parents do. But I love the emotional tug of, and also continuity as well, of them being concerned about Worf in the fallout from Sins of the Father, being, having his discommendation, and they know that what that would do to Worf, but they don't know how to
Hmm.
approach him about it. They know that Worf is kind of emotionally remote and doesn't like talking about things, and they're trying to like talk to the crew. They talk to Geordi, they talk to Guinan about ways to approach Worf to kind of, you know, let them know that they
Yeah.
have his back, and that they just want to talk to him about it, and they know that it's not going to be comfortable for Worf. And I like that. I like that exploration of Worf's relationship with his human parents, and his it's a way to kind of check in on his mentality. Half
Hmm.
a season on from what happened in Sins of the Father, which is another little
Yeah.
hint of serialization, the way TNG does it, which is they set these things up, and occasionally we'll pop in and check on them with the things like the Klingon
Yeah.
storyline with Worf.
Mhm.
So Family's a favorite of mine. I'm a really big fan of that episode. I think it's really strong. Um, yeah, AKA Mammal says Family is underrated. Love the origin
Very
story
much
for
so.
both Worf and Picard. And even Wesley Crusher gets the little holographic meet up with his dad, with one of those classic Star Trek. Every Starfleet officer records a message for the loved ones in case
Yeah.
they die. Pretty much. It's yeah, it's definitely up there for me. I think Brothers is really great. A really great Brent Spiner showcase. 3 performances. Data Lauren, Dr. Soong. Strong episode. Remember Me is a huge underrated favorite for me. I really like that. I love the twisty turniness of it. I love Gates McFadden in it. I like to see her get like a real showcase. And Suddenly Human's kind of okay. Like, it's kind of dull.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
asks some difficult questions about child
It
abuse
does.
and what's
Yeah.
yeah. I think it's another one that I talked about this in previous streams, and last night on our Trek After Dark we were talking about Charlie X at one point, and a lot of people are kind of cold on that episode. And the reason I like it is I really like the downbeat ending. I like it when Star Trek can kind of serve you a plate of you know what at the end of the episode, and really
Yeah.
kind of kick your legs out from under you. And I think Suddenly
Hmm.
Human's one of those episodes that the episode ends and nobody's really happy with where things are. It's kind of like it's just a really lousy, crappy situation where there wasn't a good outcome to be had. Um, People have to swallow their pride and take a tough loss.
Yeah.
Suddenly Human, I like that ending. Um,
Hmm.
I don't
Yeah.
know if I
Because
agree with the ending, but it's a tough
yeah.
pill to swallow, which is unique.
Because a lot of these '90s era Trek episodes kind of tie up with like a nice little bow, and it's like its own thing. But there is a few occasions where it's
Mhm.
a tough ending to kind of deal with, which again I like as well. So
Yeah, the habit is certainly, even go back to TOS, I think more often than not, the episodes end like with the crew and whatever the antagonist is kind of coming to an understanding,
yeah,
and ships flying off in opposite directions and feeling okay about it. But there are occasions,
yeah,
in going back to TOS with Charlie X and Private Little War, among others, that leave everybody kind of feeling kind of crappy about where they're leaving it. So I think Suddenly Human is an episode that fits in that sort of subgenre of Star Trek episodes with downbeat endings. Um, so, yeah, that's an episode that I'm always curious to hear what people think because it's not talked about. It's kind of tucked in the middle of these more discussed episodes like Family, like Brothers, like Remember Me, that I think have a little bit more notable reputations, and Suddenly Human kind of just flies under the radar.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think with that we should transition to our discussion on the Voyager documentary, which this kind of spawns from a tweet that David Zappone, I think that's how you pronounce his last name, sent out earlier this week, asking the fans, like, hey, what do you want to see in this documentary? They're kind of starting to put it together. They're I think off and running with it, and they're anxious to get people's input on what sorts of things they want asked and explored in these interviews. And
Yeah.
we were looking for a topic. We saw that tweet and thought, hey, let's answer the question. What do we hope to see discussed, answered, explored in this documentary when it eventually is watchable? And you're a huge Voyager fan, so I'm very eager to hear like what's your big thing?
I'll just start off with what I don't want to see.
Sure.
And then we can kind of what I don't want to see is just another What We Left Behind 2.0. I really don't want to see
the same format.
Another as tough as it is, I don't want to see another writer's room. I think that that was kind of unique to that show, and I think that writer's room had such a tight knit kind of rapport, and then throughout the entirety of the show. But with Voyager, which Bill kind of pointed out last night at Trek After Dark, is that that kind of management showrunnery kind of writer's room kind of was a constant ever-changing thing, and then with it changed the show as well. So I maybe like to see that and how that changed. But yeah, I just to start it off, I wouldn't want to see another just a similar documentary that we've already seen before. I'd like to see them do something a little bit different.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. I think it's important to differentiate it and not just have it be the Voyager version of what they did on Deep Space Nine. Don't just try to hit the same check boxes. As much as I love, and I'm not saying they can't do this, but as much as I love Brandon Braga, I would maybe. I think the temptation would be to have him sort of do what Ira Bear did and be the host of the show, kind of go around and interview the actors, and I would be okay with that because he's a different personality than Ira Bear. He's got a different sensibility. And I did really like the interviews being conducted by somebody who's deeply familiar with the show and knows the ins and outs of it, like, and not having it be sort of a stand-in person who's either a fan and coming at it from that perspective, or just a hired hand who's asking questions that are handed to them. Like, I liked Ira Bear's rapport with the other writers, the cast, the important players. Being from a position of somebody who was intimately involved and had a lot of say in the show. And I think the natural choice, if they were going to do that with the Voyager one, would be Brandon Braga. So I'm open to that, but I would just caution the urge to have it look and feel the same as Ira Bear doing the same thing on the Deep Space Nine version.
Yeah.
I mean, what do you are you opposed to that idea? Would you veto that?
This kind of could play into our hands a little bit. I think Garrett Wong and Robert Duncan McNeil should do it, but it would be fun because they have their podcast and they've kind of already kind of been exploring that a little bit. But I think Garrett would come at it kind of as an actor on the show, but also as a fan too. So you kind of get that balance a little bit. So it would kind of be like handing the keys to a fan, to be able to ask these questions and kind of work through that.
And that would certainly give the documentary a different feel than Ira Bear giving the Deep Space Nine one, having it be from the perspective of an actor who's pretty familiar with the show. As somebody who watches the Delta Flyers podcast, he's good. He's good on camera. He's good talking about the show. He's pretty familiar with. He's not somebody that has like an instant recall of every single episode. There are things he doesn't remember and discovers through this rewatch that they're doing on their show. But he remembers the overall, flow of the show. He knows what happens to the characters. He knows, the big events that happen, and
Yeah.
he remembers the big episodes. So yeah, that would certainly be cool. But I think all of the actors, even through this Delta Flyers podcast, which is really, really great, and I would recommend to everybody. They do a really good job of bringing the different actors on as guests. And there have been a lot of panels in the last couple of years. And in this last year, for Voyager's 25th anniversary, done through Zoom. And you can find them online at the various, virtual Star Trek conventions that have happened. And all of those actors have really unique perspectives, and I think have a firm understanding of what the show was from their perspective. And I think they all have something to offer, and they should all obviously, and I think they all will be, heavily featured in the interviews.
Yeah.
I think I wouldn't be opposed to that, but I kind of like the idea of having it be somebody who had some creative control. Yeah, because then what it does is, I think one of the cool things that happened in those Deep Space Nine interviews is it allows the actors, especially, to kind of turn questions back to the interviewer and have like a conversation. Like if the actors have misgivings about the way their character was handled or why decisions were made, they're not just kind of sitting there asking hypothetical questions that are rhetorical because there's no one there to answer them. If Beltran has a beef about something that was done with Chakotay, there he is, Brandon Braga, who had the keys to the car for.
So you would want.
I think so. I think I would, and Braga is such a known entity to the fans, and is such a visible, been interviewed many times. His perspective is out there. I think he would be a good guide for it. I think he's an accessible point for the fans, because I think a lot of fans, if you've seen bonus features on Blu-rays and interviews and on panels, you've seen him, you feel like you know him already. He's accessible for us. So I would,
which is similar
that way. Mm-hmm.
Which is similar to the Deep Space Nine documentary. You were kind of familiar with the kind of the showrunners and what they're all about. So I definitely get that for sure.
Yeah, I think I'm open to anything as far as that goes, and who knows if they'll even have like that. I think that was one of the unique things about the Deep Space Nine documentary, is having that kind of guide to walk through it. In the form of Ira Bear, like a consistent interviewer who's visible on camera and a part of the conversation, and having it be a conversation and not just the one side of an interview. You're not just seeing the interviewee sit there and answer questions. You're seeing the conversation with two sides. So depending on which way they decide to go with the style of the interview, if they want it to be more conversational, I would tend to go more toward somebody like Braga, who would create an environment where it's more of a conversation than just asking questions that the actor or whoever on the other side, another writer or a director, whoever can answer.
And I think he could also kind of just looking through his perspective, he could be able to talk about the perspective and how people viewed the show, but how they viewed the other shows, because it was a unique time when, there was Deep Space Nine on, there was Voyager for a time, and then then Enterprise on the horizon. So I think it would be kind of fun to explore that of that kind of how that kind of transpired and how they viewed each other as shows and different entities. So.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I would like to hear in this. I think Voyager was kind of a unique animal. Deep Space Nine did this too, obviously, but Voyager especially, I think, because of when it came on the air, when it was being developed, Star Trek was like, especially back then, like in 93, 94, Star Trek was kind of like hot and heavy. It was everywhere. There was TNG was a successful show, TOS in the past. With
there was movies.
TNG movies were coming when Voyager was in development and launching, basically. So they, I think, have a unique experience kind of walking into this with like a track already set. Talking about the actors specifically, but walking into something that is so established and not necessarily getting the opportunity to like carve out a whole new brand new thing as much as kind of jumping onto a moving train. I think they have a unique perspective on that, because I think their experience with that, along with the Enterprise guys as well, but that show had the benefit of kind of jumping back in time and trying to do something a little bit different. I think they embraced, at least trying to do different things a little bit more. But Voyager, I think, especially because it took place right after TNG and kind of concurrently with Deep Space Nine, it offers a unique experience to explore for the actors, having to jump into something that's so established, and you have to act this way and talk this way, and
competitive with the other show, was there bad blood between the shows? It's just
sure.
Yeah,
I'd be interested to hear that. And I think the other thing in relation to the other shows is, Deep Space Nine. I think one of the narratives that you got out of that documentary was they kind of benefited from sort of almost operating under the surface a little bit, with TNG being on the air and finishing, and Voyager being launched, and Voyager being on the network, and kind of that's where a lot of the attention was. Deep Space Nine got to kind of fly under the radar and do its thing without too many eyeballs on it, and they kind of got away with some things. Where Voyager felt like a show that had constant eyeballs on it, and a little bit more interference from being on a network. They were on UPN. It wasn't a syndicated show, so there was a network management component to.
There was some pressure. Yeah,
there was more pressure. It was launching a network, so there were things about it that I'm sure created a completely different experience on the production side of things, on the developmental side of things, from the writer's room, from Rick Berman's standpoint, like how to keep the show running and keep people happy, and what decisions are able to be made, as opposed to Deep Space Nine, which got to kind of, like I said, fly under the surface a little bit, under the radar, and got to take a few more risks. So I hope that they're candid about things that they wanted to do and maybe couldn't do, or things that they kind of felt backed into a corner and had to do. Now that so many years have gone by, and hopefully this is an opportunity to get people to open up and be a little honest about maybe some regrets, or because you get the sense that Voyager, there's a lot of things that it's a great show and we love it, but even from the creatives and from the actors, there are things that I think all of them would say this was kind of a tough pill to swallow, or I wish we could have done this instead of that.
Some missed opportunities were had. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, and I hope those things are explored. Just going back to the comments a little bit, aka Mammal says one of her things is when Janeway realizes what her alliance with the Borg did to other aliens in the quadrant. They didn't really explore Janeway's feelings about that. They go right into night, and Janeway is still stuck on the fact that she was her decision from the start of the show that she made to strand the crew in the Delta Quadrant. So basically, I'm getting the sense that what she's saying there is, again, kind of goes back to a lot of people's, feelings about missed opportunities, is that serialization part of the show, like the resistance to doing what Deep Space Nine was able to do by staying in one place. When you make a decision and you do something here, you do something there, you got to kind of sit and live with it and feel the consequences of those choices. Where with Voyager, she makes an alliance with the Borg. She kind of changes the balance of power in that part of the galaxy, and then
in that quadrant,
throws them thousands of light years away. So now it's way in the rearview mirror. So there's no opportunity to feel any aftershock of that decision. Changing the dynamic of the Borg. I think things like that, like what we were just talking about, I would like to hear from people about, like, did Braga and other writers on the show, did they want to do more serialized stuff? Were there things that they wish they could have done but were kind of held back on, whether it was from Berman or from the network? Like, I'm hoping they're honest about those things, and they talk about things that they wish they could have done even then. Or were they content to do a more TNG-like episodic show that was more, slices of different kinds of storytelling week to week, which is, as I'm on the record saying many times, I love that about Star Trek. I like not having the same tone week to week and being able to do different things. So was that a huge push too? Did they want to do that and were willing to sacrifice the serialization and keeping story threads running in order to do those kinds of things?
And they might mention the age-old, response to that is that they weren't serialized because they had to keep going. They couldn't stay back in the. So it's definitely a tough, because I think the show could have benefited from that. But again, I don't know. That's one thing that I would like to see as well.
Definitely.
You mentioned CAS though. would you like to see Jennifer Lean come in and talk about? I know you. I know. I think both of us are on record in saying that we probably don't want to see like a bunch of drama unfold with this, but I think it would be kind of cool.
I mean, I know Jennifer Lean has some issues from years ago. I'm hoping she's well. I'm hoping she's doing better than she was a few years ago. Anybody who's curious about that, I'm sure you can do your own research and find out if you're not aware of some of the things that she's been battling. But yeah, I mean, I would hope that she's doing fairly well, and I would love to see her. One of the things that I'm kind of learning and revisiting. I'm not watching Voyager right now. Trekker Prize is here too, by the way. Hello, how you doing? Welcome back. Thank you for coming.
Good to see you. Yeah.
In watching the Delta Flyers podcast week to week, they're kind of realizing how key and important Jennifer Lean's performance as CAS is in the early days of the show, in the first season, the second season. She's really heavy and really involved in a lot of the soft serialization kinds of things that kind of thread throughout those episodes. And she's got important relationships with multiple characters by like the halfway point in season 2. She's got obviously a key relationship with Neelix and the Doctor and Tuvok, and she's got a dynamic with Tom Paris. Like she's an important character, so that's something that I definitely would like to see explored. Whether or not she is able to participate or not, I hope the other actors, I hope the writers, I hope people who worked on the show get a chance to sort of reflect on the experience with Kes as a character and Jennifer Lean as an actress, and talk about the decision to move away from that character and why, and where they think maybe things went south as far as the writing of that character, and feeling like they ran out of gas with her, which I feel like I've heard them talk about in the past, that they felt like they kind of just ran out of rope. Felt like they were running out of interesting things to do. Like I would like to hear, like, elaborate on that. Like, at what point did you feel like what decisions were made that kind of felt like you got the character up against the wall, like you ran out of things? Like, were there things that you that character, I think, because of the touchy nature of some of the things in recent years with the actress being in a tough spot, and having it be, I'm sure, an uncomfortable situation where an actress was let go from the show, I think has led to people being reticent to talk about it and resistant to speaking on the experience. And I hope all the years having gone by and doing a documentary like this elicits some honest conversation about that character, that actress, and the decisions that were made along the way. So I'm definitely eager for some CAS exploration.
Along those lines, would you like to see Jerry Ryan explain how that kind of worked coming into the show, and maybe how Dr. Braga, how that changed, because I think we can all agree that it definitely shook up the show and kind of put it on a different path. So
definitely. And that's a definite thing that I'm sure will get discussed. I think that's such a huge imprint on the identity of that show, is that change at that season 3 to 4 transition, replacing Kes with 7, and everything that did for the cast dynamics, the way the characters interact with each other. It kind of reshuffled the board a little bit, and I'm sure that'll be explored. And I would like to hear from Jerry Ryan what it was like. I would like to hear from the other actors. We know that there is some drama that happened, and that's one of the things that you kind of alluded to. I don't want this to become like an airing of grievances and just a
dirty laundry just everywhere.
Yeah, I'm hoping it's not just a gossipy, and I'm sure it won't be. I think you get the sense that some things have been patched up and moved on from. You see pictures of particular actresses together on cruise ships and convention circuits and things. So I'm assuming that there are some better relationships these days. So hopefully that this is an opportunity to hear some history and maybe some honesty without it being mean-spirited and angry and just hurt feelings being aired. I hope that there's some reflection and honest conversation about those experiences and what that transition was like. One of the things we've talked about in the past, talking about Deep Space Nine, and they did talk about this in the documentary. In the past, I think we had a conversation on Trek Live, like in the early days, about sort of the difference between Worf transitioning into Deep Space Nine and 7 transitioning into Voyager, and how Deep Space Nine, incorporating Worf into their ensemble felt so easy. I think because Deep Space Nine had such a huge ensemble, and it was so sprawling, and there were so many
Yeah.
characters, and the characters were coming and going all the time. So that felt natural, and it felt like it changed the dynamic of the show, and it was a shot in the arm, but it didn't completely reshuffle the board. With Voyager, I think it kind
Which I
of did.
think, yeah. And some of the characters, and maybe we could talk about that, kind of took a back seat a little bit into where the show kind of morphed into like this, focus on maybe the big three instead of like this ensemble. So
Yeah, and I've heard like Garrett Wong, I think, in interviews say that. I mean, even the cast was abundantly aware that the obvious kind of trio at the top of the show that got most of the attention were Janeway, the Doctor, and Seven.
yeah,
Once this transition was made and we were kind of off and running into the heart of season 4 and beyond, they became the heaviest hitters. And it was less. And I think that's one of the things that I'd like to talk about, kind of transitioning off maybe this specific, unless you have more like specific Seven you want to tie up.
no, I don't think so.
I think one of the things that is a big hallmark for Voyager, not it's a hallmark, but it's a unique thing to look at for Voyager, is there was a lot of. I feel like there was much more inconsistency in the writers' room. There was more changeover. There was multiple showrunners. If the first 2 seasons, Michael Piller was like the head writer, and then in 3 and 4 it was Jerry Taylor, and then she left, and then it was Brandon Braga in 5 and 6, and then Kenneth Biller ended the show in season 7, while Braga kind of took his hands off a little bit and went to develop Enterprise.
Yeah.
Enterprise, so Jerry Taylor's not as active. You don't see her in interviews very often. She's much more in the shadows. She's retired. Michael Piller's no longer with us. So, in a perfect world, if everybody was still around, I would love to hear like the perspective of those 4 people and how they viewed the show. Because I think you do see the show sort of shift personalities a little bit. In those first couple of seasons, I feel like it feels like a Michael Piller show. It feels like those meaty seasons of TNG where it's kind of rotational stories about the characters and TNG sorts of stories and early Deep Space Nine sorts of stories. You can feel Michael Piller's influence, and I think it changes a little bit in season 4 and 3 and 4 with Jerry Taylor, and then I think in season 5 it really leans more into, with Braga taking over, the high concept, bigger, epic science fiction kinds of concepts. It's a little more ambitious with the sci-fi-ness of it. And then I think season 7 has its own little vibe with wrapping the show up and, I think going maybe a little smaller, maybe not quite as ambitious on the science fiction stuff. So I'd like to chart that growth of the show and the way that the show shifts based on who's in charge. I think there's an opportunity to, like, I love the writer's room thing in Deep Space Nine, but I think the more interesting thing is talking to the writers for Voyager about how people who were there for bigger chunks of time, like how did it change depending on who was running the show, and what were the priorities and things that were avoided when maybe this guy was here compared to when this person was there. I'd be interested to hear that because I think that's unique to that show.
Yeah, I think that would be fun because if you think about it, Voyager did go through some like drastic changes. I would say, I mean, I guess all the shows in their own way have done something like this, but with Voyager in particular, it did get new actors, it get new showrunners, writers, so it was definitely a ever changing thing.
Yeah.
So
especially compared to Deep Space Nine, which I think Ira Behr was, not the showrunner for the first 2 seasons, became the showrunner I think in season 3 when Michael Piller left to do Voyager. But Ira Behr was a heavy influence even in the early days. In season 1, he was leaned on and was one of the head writers. So he was there from day 1 until the end of the show. Where, in comparison with, like you just said, with Voyager, there was more, turnover in those kinds of ways. Like there wasn't necessarily somebody who, I think the closest would probably be Braga, which is why I would maybe look that way for sort of the lead of the show, the documentary, because he was there in the early days and was there till the end. A little more hands off at the end, but other than him, there was a lot more. I think if you look at the writing credits from season 1 to season 7, you see a lot more,
turnover.
Yeah, just different names kind of
Yeah.
popping in for stretches and then going away, and then different names.
Yeah.
Brian Fuller, I would love to see Brian Fuller involved.
Oh yeah. Yep.
Somehow I'd love to hear from him. He was a pretty, from season 4, I believe, on to season 7, he's a pretty consistent presence. So he comes on at about the halfway point and is leaned on and has credits, multiple times a season. So yeah, there are people who are on these shows that have grown into bigger careers outside of Star Trek, and who bigger than him. So yeah, he's somebody that I would definitely like to see.
Yeah.
AKA Man says real quick, favorite Jennifer Lean episode was Warlord from season 3. Felt like 7 of 9 kind of saved the show. Doesn't want to hear Dirty Laundry either. Yeah, and talking about Worf transitioning into Deep Space Nine, was kind of an outcast on TNG, an outsider, and I think that did lend itself well to Deep Space Nine. So many other outcasts and kind of cast-offs making up that cast, made for an easy transition. Yeah. So, anything else that you are eager to see explored in this?
I'd like to hear from Kate Mulgrew about being the first female captain. I think that would be interesting. Just because, on the heels of what everything happened with Deep Space Nine documentary, we didn't really get to see much from
Avery Brooks.
Avery Brooks, but I think that would be fun to explore as well. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. I would also like to hear the reasoning behind not bring. Like I don't want to. I want to stay away from just writing season 8 like they did in Deep Space Nine documentary, but I'd like to see their thoughts behind just making it about the journey, like it's been quoted in the show, and not have them come home for season 7 and then work through that. Yeah,
I think more so than a season 8 hypothetical, that would be great because it's cool to hear. But I think, like you said, I think you put it perfectly when you said the Deep Space Nine writers' room worked really well because that writers' room was kind of cohesive for a huge chunk of that show. Those writers, it was like you felt like put them in a room and it just felt natural and they could just go. Because they were together for a long time. Voyager, because of the nature of the show, like we were saying, the writers' room kind of changing a lot. I don't know what combination you would even really get. But I mean, I'm more interested in hearing about the discussions on how to end the show. Like, I would like to hear who had opinions on this. Like, were there people who wanted to bring them home with 6 episodes to go? Did they want to bring them home?
Yeah. What do the actors think?
I mean, did they see? There were always. I talked about this on Track After Dark last night. I feel like there were rumors back then about do you bring them were they toying with bringing them home at the end of season 6 and having a full season of Earthbound, picking up the pieces and exploring the fallout of everything with the Maquis and Seven and the Doctor. There are a lot of questions, obviously, like we've talked about many times about Voyager, with what happens to these characters when they come home. It's not just okay, pack your bags and off you go. There are more questions to be answered for many of these characters. And so I would like to hear from people like Braga, from people like Brian Fuller, people who were just on the staff, people like Ken Biller, who was running season 7, and Rick Berman, obviously, who felt that the way they went was the right way, and who had different ideas that they wish could have been done. Were people on board, uniformly, that what they did was roundabout the most satisfying way to go to kind of end the show with them arriving and having it be about the journey and not so much about what happens when they get home. Or were there people who really wanted to explore what happens in the Alpha Quadrant? I hope that that's a big emphasis. I would love to hear that. And from the perspective of the actors, of course, but I'm really interested in hearing from the writers. Are there people who felt who were on the staff that there was a missed opportunity there, and what would they have done? What kinds of things did they have in mind if they could have done it? What were the things that were in their minds about what was going to happen to these characters if they could have had time to explore that?
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of things that they could talk about, and a lot of things they could do. Um, this do you have anything more about Voyager before I ask another kind of
Um,
bigger overarching?
Anything else on Voyager? Nah, I think we covered it. I'm open minded to a lot of things. I trust these guys. I think they've done a nice job with not just Deep Space Nine documentary, but I think they're the ones who put together things like the Captains with Shatner and Chaos on the Bridge. Like, this is a crew that's done these Star Trek documentaries over the last few years, and I think have done some interesting things. And they all feel a little different. I'm confident that they don't need to hear from people like us to know that don't just repeat yourself from what worked on Deep Space Nine. Like, do something different, get
Yeah.
creative, come up with a different angle, and make this your own thing. And I think they will do that. So I'm open minded to anything. I have faith in them, but I think there are a lot of interesting threads to explore with the show, because I think there was a lot of, I'm going to use the word drama, but I'm not talking about the drama between the actors and like infighting and stuff like that. But I mean, just like there was a lot of pressure on the show. There were a lot of things that there were episodes like Year of Hell and Dragon's Teeth, which are clearly like bigger concepts that I think they had bigger eyeballs on. That were stories that were kind of
You could
hatched to
tell
be
that they
longer
wanted
running.
more.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
If we can
Yeah.
tell that from the outside watching the show, and we know that from interviews
You know.
contemporary,
Yeah.
then you know that there are interesting stories to be told. I think from the
Yeah.
writers, like Year of Hell was clearly hatched as this bigger concept that could potentially run a season, and they've talked about that. Brian and Braga specifically.
I think
I want to hear that. Like, I
that's
want to
really
hear.
good.
Mhm.
Yeah, what episodes specifically were you like this concept was actually, a 2 or 3 parter or a
Mhm.
season like you said with Year of Hell. So,
Or we had to compromise to get it to
um
fit into the 1 hour. Yeah, like
yeah,
yeah.
let's talk about that a little bit. Um my final question is, you kind of mentioned it, that they've got a few of these under their belt. Do you think we'll get, like, not to shift the spotlight away from Voyager, but real quick, do you think we'll get an Enterprise one?
I hope so. I think that's another interesting. I think the biggest challenge there is the Blu-rays. The thing that we haven't gotten from Voyager and Deep Space Nine is those Blu-ray bonus features that I know you haven't seen. But Enterprise has hours of retrospective interviews that are kind of covering a lot of these things on those Blu-rays.
Okay.
There's a writers' room kind of roundtable where they talk about the show. There's the actors' roundtable. There's hours of interviews with the cast and producers, and there's Blu-ray. There's DVD commentaries on directors' commentaries and on episodes and with writers involved and stuff. So there's a lot of stuff that's kind of already been aired
Okay.
through those documentaries. More years have passed, and there's always more to discuss with Star Trek. So I'm open to it for sure, and I would love to
Yeah.
see it with more hindsight and even more time to reflect. But Deep Space Nine and Voyager, because they haven't done the Blu-ray thing, I think haven't benefited from that kind of treatment the way TNG and Enterprise kind of got to benefit.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'll be interested to see. I think there's an opportunity there to explore more and do more outside the box stuff the way that these documentaries do. But there is some good content out there about Enterprise on those Blu-rays that I think would scratch that itch pretty well. So we got to get you those Blu-rays. Is the
Yeah.
'cause
That's I think that was the the point that was made there as well.
Any other final thoughts on?
Um, I'm just really excited. I never kind of imagined that they would do something like this with Voyager. Um, I think the Deep Space Nine documentary made sense because it had popularity had grown so much for that show. It kind of felt right. As I understand it, it wasn't very popular when it came out, but I think as of late, maybe people cite as the best Star Trek show, which I kind of want to make that point, that best and favorite can change. So
Sure.
But with Voyager, it um, always felt like second tier or
Yeah.
in the back burners as far as things like this. So it's really nice to be able to see Voyager get its day, uh, and explore some stuff, because I think we've made a bunch of points this morning that can attest that there's still a lot to explore. There was a lot of left on the table that would be nice to see worked through and talked about. So I'm really excited. I wish it wasn't a couple of years, but uh,
Yeah,
good things come to those who wait. So
for sure. If the Deep Space Nine
yeah,
documentary taught us anything, is it may take a little bit of time. It was a long process. Oh, the other thing that I think we got to talk about real quick, just to finish off. Another thing that I hope that they do repeat from the Deep Space Nine documentary is I hope they take some footage and remaster it into HD. I would love to see some
oh yeah,
stormtroopers.
yeah,
That was a huge component from the Deep Space Nine documentary, and also a huge reason
yeah.
why it took a while, because they did do that. Like all the clips you saw from Deep Space Nine in that documentary were remastered, and
What do
I would like to see that done on Voyager as well.
which clips would you like to see?
Oh, I mean, like Deep Space Nine did, I'd like to see a representation from a big chunk of the show. But that battle sequence that they did for the visual effects side of things, maybe something from Scorpion or Year of Hell to kind of showcase what that visual effects team was able to do, and what it would look like remastered. I'd probably go there with one of those two episodes. I'm not sure what, but um,
Yeah,
I could think of like that scene in Scorpion with Voyager kind of being chased by a huge swarm of Borg ships that you think are going to come for Voyager, but just warp right by them because they're running from 8472.
yeah,
There's a cool scene there, some neat visual effects. Yeah, I mean, I'm game for anything there, but I hope that there's a fairly wide representation of stuff from the 7 years of the show redone.
yeah. Oops, sorry, real quick. One more thing that I would like to see
Sure, hey, yeah.
is maybe Robert Beltran and Kate Mulgrew talk about the romance, will they, won't they kind of thing with those two characters that they both played, and maybe hear from the writers and stuff of why they kind of didn't go that route. I think would be fun too. um, yeah,
Yeah, I think with that would certainly be an interesting avenue to explore, because I think that's another example of, I think, maybe writers' room changes, showrunner changes, changing the priorities of the show. Like one example of that, kind of similarly, was if you go on like Memory Alpha and you read, tidbits from magazines and books that were written about the writing of the show from back in the day, is a character like Suitor, for example. Michael Piller loved that character from Mel, the
yeah,
basics. And Jerry Taylor, who took over the show in season 3, hated the character. So what did she do when she took over season 3? She killed him right away in Basics Part
kill
2.
them. Yeah,
Yeah, so those kinds of things happen with showrunner changes. There are things that maybe Michael Piller was interested in exploring in seasons 1 and 2, like this will they won't they, maybe they will, maybe they won't relationship with Janeway and Chakotay, or maybe Jerry Taylor, once they kind of got into seasons 3 and 4, didn't do it for her, so it kind of just died a quick death and went away.
Yeah.
So there are things like that. I think that all kind of would hopefully be explored in the showrunner exploration. But
Yeah.
that's a specific one. That's a big one that a lot of people are interested in, because there are people who wish that they did more there, and there are people who didn't like it at all. But it's one of those divisive things about Voyager that it would be interesting to explore for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I'd like to hear the perspective of the actors. I feel like in conventions and things, like, you'll hear them kind of joke about it on stage, but these documentary interviews that tend to create a little bit more of an honest environment where more things can get talked about and fresh. So hopefully,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, the Chakotay 7 relationship, aka Mammal. That's another one. Like these different character interactions that kind of either came into play late or were toyed with early on, but never really
Yeah.
amounted to much. Yeah, a lot of those things I'd be interested to hear more about.
Yeah.
Last thoughts. Anything? No.
Yeah, I think the only podcast I've mentioned probably is the Delta Flyers because
Yeah.
I think it fits really well with the topic. I personally stay away from it, but Bill has raved about it, so definitely go check that out.
Why do you stay away from it?
I just because I want to be able to watch it congruently with Voyager,
Mm-hmm.
and I have this thing where I have to give it time to come back to it in another rewatch, just so it feels fresh again. I try to preserve that freshness.
So
That makes it.
you're saving it for the next time you do Voyager.
I'm saving it. Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Which is cool because you'll get to burn through it. It'll be something that like you won't have to wait week to week for episodes. It'll be built up. But I can tell you, as somebody who does listen to it, I really enjoy it. It's cool to hear the perspective of people who worked on the show. I love the way they talk about the different directors and like they give you a real sense of what it was like to just be on the show, grinding out that show for 7 years, and different people who came and went. You get a feel for which directors would come on the set, and actors would be like, "Whew, we're in good hands. It's all good." And then other directors were like, "Oh God," like there's definitely interesting takeaways that I'm always interested to hear about. That would be cool to hear in the documentary as well, but I think nice intimate podcast like this, it's easier I think for the actors to be maybe even more candid about some things.
But it's also fun because some of these actors have went on to be more on the production side of things with Roxanne Dawson and Robert Downey McNeil. So I think that would be fun to kind of explore too, because now that they have all this experience, they can kind of look back on it and be like,
Yeah, and that's the thing too with the just from that podcast, and then kind of you would see it in the documentary. I'm sure is some of these you're gonna get a mix of the way the different actors kind of view the show. I think you're gonna get anything from Robert Downey McNeil is when he watches the show or thinks about the show, he thinks about it from because he's a director now, mostly director producer, so he thinks about the show from that lens. Like he can't watch the show without thinking about it from the perspective of the director and the production side of things. And then Garrett Wang is much more like kind of a traditional fan, looks at the show from just kind of an observer who loves the show. And then you have like guys like Beltran who are a little bit more removed from it and maybe don't love it as much. Kind of look at it like it was my job. It's what I went and did for 7 years. And the day-to-day experience was this, and I disagreed with this. I like this. And I think all three of those perspectives are valid and create an interesting kind of web of like, what was this experience like? And you hear it from different angles. So I hope that's explored in the documentary as well. But you can get it on the Delta Flyers podcast as well now, if you're inclined.
About every single episode. So.
Yes. Yep.
AKA Mammal is asking a very open-ended question of where we could go down a rabbit hole.
In your guys' opinion,
most interesting character on Voyager. That's really tough to kind of nail down. I will say maybe I'll just kind of cheat a little bit, but a lot of the characters do have some rich, interesting backstories. Paris, ex-con, that's one thing that I'll kind of touch on at the end. But all these characters have, with Neelix, he's got a great backstory. 7 of 9, where they maybe took a little bit too far, I think, has an interesting backstory with the Borg and her parents. But one thing that I want to see with the writers and the showrunners is why they tabled the Maquis Starfleet kind of relationship. I think that would be fun to kind of talk about. Not to take light away from your question, aka Mammal, but it kind of just sparked an idea. But I think a lot of the characters in Voyager are very interesting. The problem that I have is the utilization and the maybe back burner things that happened with some of those characters. So it's tough.
From an interesting standpoint, like just like who's the most interesting to think about. The easy answer would be like the Doctor or 7.
Doctor.
Yeah.
7.
Because they're
just because
it's explored. They're the ones that I think got the most on-screen development, but I think I like the Doctor's growth a lot. I think I'll say the Doctor. If I'm going to give a straight answer and not hedge and give every single character, I'm going to say the Doctor. I love the way that his character charts from the beginning to the end. I love the evolution of his being mentored by CAS about how to be human, how to interact with people, how to be socially aware of situations and different kinds of people, and be a good friend. And then her flipping that and doing the same for Seven. I love that kind of give and take and give of the lessons of humanity. That is one of my favorite elements of Voyager, watching that develop over the 7 years. And he's a classic Star Trek character in the vein of Spock and Data.
The outsider.
The outsider exploration
that's kind of
of humanity.
my point.
Yeah. And Seven.
It's a continuation of that outsider type of character. Like we got Spock, like you mentioned, we got Data, but this to me is playing with that outsider kind of character style and kind of flipping it, like you said, to where he was the outsider, kind of makes his way into this tight-knit crew, and then kind of flips it on, and that he becomes the mentor with another outsider. So
exactly, yeah.
Yeah,
I would say Chakotay too, if you're talking unexplored or who's interesting but maybe a lot of meat left on the bone. I think his experience with the Maquis and his also experience with Starfleet, ex-Starfleet, went to the Maquis, can kind of walk that line and sees the value in both kind of ways of doing things. There were more things to explore there that I wish got more time.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Closing thoughts? Any last things?
I don't think so. We'll just be back with another course heading next week to talk about the next Discovery episode. And then the next week is another Trek Live, focusing on conflict in Star Trek. So
next Saturday at 10 a.m. we'll be talking about the People of Earth, season 3, episode 3 of Discovery, 10 a.m. Eastern time. And Sunday, 10 a.m. Eastern time, we will be back for more Trek Live to talk about conflict in Star Trek and the ways that the different shows used conflict with the characters and maybe didn't use conflict with the characters as much. So we'll kind of be looking at the course of those those kinds of things through the course of Star Trek.
Yep, it's been fun talking about Voyager. I'm really excited for the documentary to come out. Very eager. Can't wait.
Likewise.
Yeah.
Yep. Hopefully it's a less long wait than the Deep Space Nine documentary was, but I'm willing to wait if it's going to be as good as that was. So it'll be interesting to see that develop over time. I think if you follow David Zappone on Twitter, you'll get occasional updates and tidbits here and there, just the way they did with the Deep Space Nine documentary. Get a feel for how it's coming together in the years that it's going to take to make it. So recommend that too.
Yep.
All right.
Yep. It's been fun. Yeah. We'll see you guys next week.
See you next week.